Today we step into the dazzling yet dangerous world of ancient Rome, where emperors didn't simply govern, they lived richer than the gods themselves. But what does it mean to possess more wealth than Olympus could imagine? Could endless gold, towering palaces, and rivers of wine ever be enough? Or did such extravagance push these rulers toward ruin? Imagine feasts where pearls were crushed into goblets of wine, villas so vast they rivaled entire cities, and emperors who demanded not only obedience, but worship. Who were these men who believed marble and gold could buy eternity? And how far were they willing to go to prove their supremacy over both mortals and gods? Across centuries, from the empire's founder, Augustus, to the great Constantine, each ruler left behind a story where power, wealth, and madness collided. Their lives were not just histories of politics, but cautionary tales of desire without limits. So prepare to walk through the golden halls of Rome and meet 11 emperors whose riches defied reason. And ask yourself, at what point does luxury stop being power and start becoming poison? If gods demanded temples, Augustus built something bigger, an empire dripping in marble, gold, and glory. Augustus, the man who transformed Rome from a fragile republic into the greatest empire the world had ever seen, understood something his rivals never fully grasped. Power was not just about armies, it was about image. He wrapped himself in wealth to convince Romans and the world that he was more than a man. His palaces shone with imported marble, his statues stood taller than life, and even his private feasts were designed to remind guests that they were in the presence of a living legend. The riches of Rome flowed directly into his hands. Provinces conquered in his name filled his coffers with gold, silver, and exotic luxuries from across the known world. Egyptian treasure, taken after the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, became the foundation of his fortune. With it, Augustus launched one of the most ambitious building projects in history, famously boasting that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Every column and temple became a monument not only to the empire, but to his own eternal image. Yet his luxury was not reckless. Unlike later emperors who wasted wealth in madness or vanity, Augustus used his fortune as propaganda. Public games, festivals, and monuments reminded ordinary Romans that their emperor's prosperity was their prosperity. He created an illusion. Rome looked eternal, Augustus looked divine, and no one could separate one from the other. This subtle use of luxury made him untouchable. In the end, Augustus was not simply rich, he was strategic with his riches. His wealth legitimized his rule and set the stage for every emperor who followed. Without Augustus turning gold into power, Rome might never have become the empire that dazzled and terrified the ancient world. After Augustus built marble Rome, Tiberius decided luxury was best enjoyed in exile on a sunny island. Tiberius, the reluctant successor of Augustus, inherited not only the throne but also immense wealth. Unlike his predecessor, he was less interested in parading his riches across the empire and far more inclined to indulge them in secrecy. His chosen paradise was the island of Capri, a rocky outpost in the Bay of Naples that he transformed into a retreat of unimaginable luxury. While Rome expected a strong emperor at its helm, Tiberius preferred high cliffs, sea breezes, and pleasure palaces overlooking the Mediterranean. The emperor built a chain of opulent villas across Capri, most famously the Villa Jovis. These palaces were not just retreats, they were architectural marvels stocked with imported marble, flowing fountains, and endless halls designed for feasts and entertainment. Guests were surrounded by symbols of wealth at every turn, from golden dishes to exotic delicacies brought from the far reaches of the empire. Tiberius used wealth as a curtain, shielding his private life from Roman politics while living in comfort unmatched by most rulers in history. But luxury, when hidden, often breeds rumor. Ancient historians accused Tiberius of indulging in scandalous excesses, painting Capri as a playground of vice. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories reveal how his attempt to retreat into wealth only added to his sinister legend. While Augustus used gold to legitimize his image, Tiberius let gold isolate him from the very people he ruled. His empire ran on autopilot, guided by loyal officials, while he drifted further into the shadows of his island. In the end, Tiberius's relationship with wealth was one of withdrawal rather than display. He hoarded treasure and lived lavishly, but unlike the builders and showmen who came before and after, his fortune became a wall rather than a stage. Yet, even in retreat, he proved a truth that echoed through Roman history. Emperors could bend unimaginable riches not only to rule an empire, but to escape it. If Tiberius hid his luxury, Caligula made sure everyone choked on his, pearls included. Caligula, the infamous grandson of Augustus, ascended to the throne with promises of hope and generosity. At first, Rome adored him, but it didn't take long before his obsession with wealth and spectacle consumed him and the empire's treasury. For Caligula, riches were not simply for comfort, they were weapons of shock. He believed luxury should be so extravagant that it terrified as much as it dazzled. Banquets under Caligula became legends. He served meals sprinkled with gold dust and pearls dissolved in vinegar, only to watch nobles squirm as they swallowed fortunes. His palaces gleamed with gilded ceilings, and he spent recklessly on games, festivals, and personal projects. The most notorious were his floating palaces, colossal ships decorated with marble floors, lush gardens, and even heated baths drifting across Lake Nemi. They were less boats than floating mansions, a literal empire sailing on water. But Caligula's extravagance was matched only by his madness. He declared himself a living god, demanding temples and statues in his honor. He even appointed his beloved horse Incitatus as a priest, and allegedly planned to make him a consul. For Caligula, wealth blurred the line between ruler and deity, reality and absurdity. Of course, this reckless spending came at a cost. The empire's treasury, once carefully managed by Augustus, was emptied within a few short years. His paranoia grew with his luxury, and soon the senators who once bowed to him plotted in secret. Caligula's reign ended violently, struck down by his own guards, but not before leaving behind one of the most scandalous reputations in Roman history. Caligula's story shows what happens when wealth stops serving power and begins devouring it. To him, gold was not a tool, but an addiction, and his name became forever tied to the dangerous marriage of riches and madness. After Caligula's pearls and palaces sank Rome's treasury, Claudius decided to spend his fortune building rivers. When Claudius unexpectedly became emperor, many underestimated him. Labeled as awkward and unlikely to rule, he surprised Rome by being both shrewd and ambitious. But ambition in the Roman world required gold, and Claudius poured his wealth into colossal projects that would transform the empire. Unlike Caligula's wasteful spectacles, Claudius invested in monuments of stone and water that were meant to last for centuries. One of his greatest feats was the construction of aqueducts, including the Aqua Claudia, which brought fresh water into the heart of Rome. These aqueducts were marvels of engineering, stretching across valleys and mountains, a constant reminder that imperial wealth could move nature itself. He also built the great harbour at Portus, a massive project that secured Rome's grain supply. Ships from across the Mediterranean docked there, ensuring that the empire's people and their emperor were never hungry. Of course, Claudius knew how to use his riches for pleasure as well. He hosted grand banquets, entertained with gladiatorial games, and filled his palaces with marble, silver, and silk from the far reaches of the empire. But unlike Caligula's wild indulgences, Claudius's luxury was practical, even strategic. His wealth reinforced stability, and every bridge, aqueduct, and harbour made the empire more dependent on his reign. Yet there was also calculation in his generosity. By funding games and spectacles, Claudius ensured loyalty from the people. By investing in construction, he secured the empire's infrastructure. His luxury was never wasted. It was a stage for his legitimacy. And in that way, Claudius proved that wealth in Rome wasn't just about living richer than gods. It was about ruling as if you were chosen by them. If Claudius built aqueducts for Rome, Nero built something shinier, a golden palace fit for nightmares. Nero remains one of the most notorious emperors in history, not just for his cruelty, but for his unrelenting obsession with luxury. When the Great Fire of Rome devastated the city in 64 AD, Nero saw not tragedy, but opportunity. From the ashes rose his Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a palace so vast and extravagant that it stretched across hundreds of acres, decorated with gold leaf, jewels and ceilings that could rain petals and perfume onto guests during banquets. It was less a home and more a kingdom within the city. Inside this palace, wealth knew no limits. Rooms were covered in mosaics of semi-precious stones, hallways gleamed with ivory, and dining halls were designed to revolve like the heavens themselves. Guests dined on exotic dishes, flamingo tongues, oysters, rare wines, while surrounded by a theatre of excess. For Nero, luxury was not about comfort, but spectacle. He wanted every Roman to know that their emperor lived on a level beyond mortality. But Nero's extravagance bled into performance as well. He fancied himself a great artist, singer and actor, forcing nobles to sit through endless recitals. He poured fortunes into theatre productions, races, and festivals, turning the empire's wealth into a stage for his vanity. While Claudius used riches to strengthen Rome, Nero used them to glorify himself alone. The backlash was inevitable. His golden palace, built while ordinary Romans struggled after the fire, became a symbol of imperial arrogance. Whispers spread of tyranny, waste, and madness. Eventually, rebellion rose against him, and as his world collapsed, Nero fled, lamenting not his empire, but his art. His final words, "What an artist dies in me," revealed a man who saw wealth and power not as tools of rule, but as props in his own tragic performance. Nero's reign was proof that luxury, when abused, could ignite not only palaces, but entire empires. After Nero turned Rome into his personal theatre, Domitian decided to gild the stage itself, permanently. Domitian, younger son of Vespasian and brother of Titus, inherited an empire rebuilt after Nero's chaos. Yet instead of restraining himself, he embraced the grandeur of wealth with relentless intensity. His rule became synonymous with glittering palaces, endless spectacles, and the conviction that the emperor should radiate godlike majesty. For Domitian, luxury was not an accessory, it was the very language of his reign. The emperor filled Rome with monuments that displayed his power. He restored and expanded the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill, transforming it into a sprawling residence with marble halls, golden ceilings, and massive courtyards meant to awe every visitor. Statues of himself stood in temples and plazas, many of them gilded, blurring the line between ruler and deity. To walk through Rome under Domitian was to be constantly reminded that wealth and divinity were inseparable in the emperor's image. But his spending was not limited to stone. Domitian loved games, and he poured enormous sums into gladiatorial shows, races, and public festivals. These events dazzled the crowds, reminding ordinary Romans that their emperor's riches could buy joy, spectacle, and distraction. Bread and circuses amplified by gold kept loyalty alive, at least for a while. Yet beneath the marble shine lay shadows. Domitian's obsession with control and image created fear among senators and nobles. His golden statues became symbols of paranoia, his palaces, fortresses of isolation. While the people enjoyed the fruits of his luxury, the elite whispered of tyranny. Eventually, his gilded reign collapsed under the weight of conspiracy, ending with his assassination in 96 AD. Domitian's story shows another face of Roman wealth when riches became propaganda carved into stone and spectacle. Unlike Nero's reckless vanity, Domitian weaponized luxury as a tool of dominance, though in the end, gold could not protect him from the daggers of Rome's elite. If Domitian gilded Rome itself, Hadrian preferred to build a second Rome just for himself. Hadrian, remembered as one of Rome's most cultured emperors, wielded wealth not only as power, but as art. Unlike Nero's theatrics or Domitian's gilded palaces, Hadrian poured his riches into creating spaces that reflected his intellect, taste, and global vision. His greatest creation, the Villa Adriana at Tivoli, was more than a residence. It was an empire in miniature, sprawling across the countryside with palaces, libraries, gardens, and pools that blended Greek, Egyptian, and Roman styles. Walking through the villa was like traveling the known world. There were halls inspired by Athens, courtyards echoing Alexandria, and fountains that rivaled the great baths of Rome. Statues of gods, philosophers, and heroes lined the gardens, turning his estate into a museum of stone. Every mosaic tile and marble column whispered of Hadrian's devotion to culture, but also of his boundless resources. Only an emperor with nearly infinite wealth could commission such a dream. Hadrian's luxury was also tied to his restless curiosity. He traveled extensively across the empire from Britain to Egypt, leaving behind monuments wherever he went. The most famous, Hadrian's Wall, may have been a defensive frontier, but it was also a symbol of his power to shape landscapes with stone. His building projects, funded by the empire's treasure, became physical embodiments of his rule, long after his presence had passed. Yet his wealth also revealed a more human side. Hadrian's grief for his beloved companion Antinous led him to create statues, temples, and even a cult in his honor. In marble and myth, Antinous became immortal, a testament to the emperor's ability to turn personal sorrow into eternal grandeur. Hadrian's reign demonstrated that Roman luxury was not always reckless or paranoid. Sometimes it became legacy. Through his architectural wonders, Hadrian ensured that his wealth outlived him. Monuments of stone and beauty that still stand today, echoing the empire's golden age. Hadrian built monuments to gods, but Commodus decided to skip the middleman. He was the god. Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, grew up in the shadow of a philosopher king, yet he chose a very different legacy. Where his father embodied discipline and wisdom, Commodus embraced luxury, spectacle, and self-worship. He spent fortunes presenting himself not just as emperor, but as the reincarnation of Hercules. Draped in lion skins, holding golden clubs, and commissioning statues across the empire, he forced Romans to see him as a living god. His obsession went beyond imagery. Commodus adored the arena and spent massive sums to perform in gladiatorial games, not as a spectator, but as a fighter. Of course, his battles were carefully staged. Opponents fought with wooden weapons while Commodus wielded steel, ensuring his victories. But the cost was staggering. Every appearance drained the imperial treasury as nobles were forced to pay enormous fees to watch their emperor play hero. He turned the Colosseum into his private theatre, where the star was always himself. Beyond the arena, Commodus indulged in lavish banquets, palaces adorned with precious metals, and endless self-celebration. He renamed Rome itself Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus, and even renamed the months after his titles. To him, wealth was not just for living richly, it was for rewriting reality so that everything revolved around his divine image. But the extravagance bred resentment. Senators loathed his waste, the army lost respect for his antics, and the empire itself weakened under the strain of his ego-driven spending. Eventually, conspiracy ended his reign in blood, assassinated in 192 AD by those who had grown tired of worshipping a man who thought he was Hercules. Commodus left behind a cautionary tale of what happens when wealth and power fuse into delusion. His luxury was not legacy like Hadrian's, but a fantasy, one that cost both him and Rome dearly. If Commodus wasted gold pretending to be Hercules, Caracalla spent fortunes turning bath time into an empire. Caracalla, son of Septimius Severus, is remembered not only for his ruthlessness, but also for the sheer magnitude of his luxurious vision. While other emperors built palaces for themselves, Caracalla built one for the entire city, the massive baths of Caracalla. Completed in the early 3rd century, these public baths were among the largest and most extravagant structures ever created in Rome. They weren't just for hygiene, they were theatres of marble, mosaics, and social life, designed to show that the emperor's wealth could touch every citizen. The baths could hold thousands at once, featuring hot and cold pools, gyms, libraries, and gardens. Walls were clad in marble, floors glittered with intricate mosaics, and towering columns framed ceilings that soared above the crowds. Statues of gods and heroes lined the halls, while water gushed through aqueducts built specifically to serve this complex. To bathe in Caracalla's masterpiece was to step into a world of imperial luxury, a reminder that Rome's prosperity flowed directly from its emperor's hands. Caracalla's extravagance wasn't limited to stone and water. He was infamous for his lavish military spending, showering soldiers with gold to secure their loyalty. His infamous Constitutio Antoniniana granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free men of the empire, a move partly designed to expand the tax base, but also to bind the people more closely to the emperor's power and wealth. In his mind, imperial fortune was inseparable from imperial control. Yet behind the shimmering marble, Caracalla's reign was dark. His paranoia led to massacres and betrayals, and his name became associated with cruelty as much as grandeur. The same man who gave Rome its greatest baths also ordered rivers of blood to flow when loyalty wavered. In the end, he was assassinated by his own guards while on campaign, proving that no amount of wealth or monumental construction could shield an emperor from betrayal. Caracalla's story shows the dual edge of Roman luxury. It could unify and dazzle a city, but it could also mask the violence and instability beneath. His baths still stand today as ruins, echoes of a ruler who thought marble and water could make him eternal. If Caracalla built marble baths for Rome, Elagabalus built feasts so absurd even gods would choke. Elagabalus, who ruled Rome as a teenager, quickly earned a reputation as one of history's most eccentric emperors. Barely 14 when crowned, he had access to unimaginable wealth and wielded it with reckless creativity. For him, luxury was not about power or legacy, but about indulgence. The stranger, the better. Banquets under Elagabalus became infamous. Guests were overwhelmed with mountains of food, rivers of wine, and dishes featuring flamingo brains, camel heels, and rare delicacies from across the empire. But it wasn't just what he served, it was how. Ancient writers claimed he once released flower petals from hidden ceilings in such massive quantities that guests suffocated beneath the weight of roses. On other occasions, he is said to have entertained guests with couches filled with whoopee cushion-like bladders, sending senators tumbling to the floor in humiliating laughter. True or exaggerated, these stories illustrate the image Elagabalus cultivated, a ruler who turned the empire's fortune into a stage for his bizarre imagination. He also poured wealth into religious eccentricities. A devotee of the Syrian sun god Elagabal, he tried to force Rome to accept his foreign deity. Temples rose at his command, decorated with gold and jewels, and sacred processions paraded treasures through the city. To Romans steeped in tradition, this was both shocking and offensive. The emperor appeared to be dismantling centuries of cultural identity for his personal whims. Beyond religion and feasts, his extravagance stretched into personal excess. Elagabalus spent lavishly on silks, perfumes, and cosmetics, breaking every norm of Roman masculinity. He demanded jewels and ornaments usually reserved for women, openly defying the expectations of his role. His life of indulgence and scandal, paired with erratic rule, alienated senators, soldiers, and citizens alike. Eventually, his extravagance caught up with him. In 222 AD, still a teenager, he was assassinated by his own guards. His reign lasted only 4 years, but it burned brightly, a whirlwind of gold, roses, and absurdity that even Rome could not endure for long. After Elagabalus drowned guests in roses, Constantine chose a different trick, drowning the world in cities. Constantine the Great, remembered as the first Christian emperor, wielded wealth on a scale that rivaled all who came before him. But unlike Nero's golden palaces or Elagabalus's absurd feasts, Constantine used fortune to reshape the very geography of empire. His most enduring creation was Constantinople, the new Rome, built on the shores of Byzantium. Poured into its foundations were the riches of the empire, palaces of marble, basilicas with golden ceilings, and colossal statues that declared the city a rival to Olympus itself. In Constantinople, Constantine fused luxury with purpose. Churches gleamed with mosaics, streets were paved in marble, and forums overflowed with monuments celebrating both Rome and his reign. Treasures flowed from every province to decorate his capital, Egyptian obelisks, Greek columns, and Eastern jewels, creating a city that reflected the vastness of his empire. This was not just a palace or a bathhouse, it was an entire metropolis raised to glorify an emperor's vision. But Constantine's luxury was also political. By embracing Christianity, he poured resources into basilicas like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and St. Peter's in Rome. His wealth reshaped religion itself, turning a persecuted faith into the cornerstone of imperial identity. Unlike Nero or Domitian, Constantine wasn't just gilding his image, he was gilding an ideology, one that outlived him for centuries. Yet for all his grandeur, Constantine never abandoned the old tools of Roman display. He commissioned golden coins, stamped with his image, statues in heroic nudity, and arches celebrating his victories. Luxury remained his language of power, but it was refined into permanence rather than spectacle. He sought to be remembered not as a mad emperor, but as a divine founder. Constantine's reign closed the circle of Roman luxury. From Augustus's marble to Nero's gold, from Hadrian's villas to Caracalla's baths, emperors had always wielded riches as symbols. But Constantine transformed wealth into a city and a faith, ensuring that his luxury was not just remembered, it became the bedrock of a new world. From Augustus, who turned brick into marble, to Constantine, who built a new Rome upon gold and faith, the emperors of Rome lived lives that seemed to surpass even the gods. Their wealth was staggering, their palaces unmatched, and their visions often terrifying in scale. Yet across centuries, one truth remained: luxury was never neutral. It could legitimize, as with Augustus, or isolate, as with Tiberius. It could inspire monuments, like Hadrian's villa, or spark madness, like Caligula's floating palaces. The line between glory and ruin was razor-thin. Nero's golden dreams burned with his city, Commodus's fantasies ended in betrayal, and Elagabalus's absurd banquets collapsed into assassination. Wealth gave them power, but it also consumed them. Some emperors built legacies still standing today, while others left only cautionary tales carved into history. So what do these stories reveal? That even men who lived richer than gods could not escape mortality. Gold fades, marble cracks, and banquets end. What remains is the reminder that unchecked desire, whether for glory or indulgence, always exacts a price. The emperors of Rome ruled with treasures beyond imagination, but in the end, not even gods could save them.